Hello. I've been in a meeting with you before. Yeah. Hi, everyone, you three. Hi, everyone. We know this is going to be recorded and then be online, so we'll have the possibility to get this discussion further. So thank you for bearing with us here in the last moments of IACC. My name is Joanna Nublat. I'm a journalist. I work at TI Brazil. And this is quite a new topic for me, actually, and very interesting. How do you guarantee transparency and governance of compensation funds due by companies for environmental crimes, even when dealing with human rights crimes? We'll build the debate around two specific cases that happened in Brazil, two dam collapses that occurred in the state of Minas Gerais, the first one in 2015 and the second one in 2019. The first was in the city of Mariana, where Monica comes from today, and it killed 20 people. And up to this day, it's the largest environmental crime disaster in Brazil. The second one happened in Brumadinho 3 years later and killed over 170 people. As we will discuss here, these crimes have been followed by chaos, poor transparency, and poor governance in the money that has been spent to compensate these crimes. We are two coordinators here, me and André Carvalho, professor at University of Ouro Preto. Then he'll speak in a while, then we'll listen to Mônica dos Santos, a local activist from Bento Rodrigues in Mariana. The district was destroyed by 2015 dam collapse. Monica and her family lost their homes and the lives they used to live until that point. It's interesting because I wanted to remember our Transparency International VP a few hours earlier. She read the motion that ended this conference here, and the title of the motion is Defending the Defenders. The time is now. And I would like to say that, just to stress that Monica is one of these defenders that we need to defend. So after Monica, we'll listen to José Francisco Companho, chair of TI Brazil's board, and also a specialist in forensic investigation into companies and also a specialist on governance. Then we'll pass to Charlotte Palmieri from TI France, who will discuss current regulation and proposals on compensation funds. And finally, but not least, Ana Carolina Salomão, partner at Pogust Goodhead Law Firm, based in the UK, which is representing some of the dam collapse victims, such as Monica, in international lawsuits. So then I'll pass to André, and then we'll hear Monica.
Thank you very much for still being here. I apologize for trying to speak English without knowing it, but I will try. I'm immensely grateful to the efforts of everyone who accepted this invitation to this workshop and made the effort to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you very much, Joanna, for coordinating this activity with me and make it happen. Without you, it wouldn't be possible. On November 50, 2015, in the city of Mariana, Minas Gerais, an iron ore tailings dam called Fundão broke in Germano mining complex. No sirens sounded, no warming or evacuation systems worked. We never knew that one day the dam could be break, kill and destroy. Fundão belonged to the mining company Samarco, which is owned by Vale and BHP, two of the largest mining companies in the world. The Sea of Iron Ore tailings breached several locations and killed 20 people, most of them Samarco or outsourced workers. It destroyed two sub-districts of the city of Mariana, the historic communities of Bento Rodrigues and Paracatu de Baixo. Also, a large part of the Gesteira sub-district belonged to another city, Barra Longa. With its strength and violence, it traveled through 49 affected cities and two Brazilian states, Minas Gerais and Espírito Santo, reaching the sea. The mud coursed more than 410 miles In the 3 destroyed sub-districts along the way, the tailings found public schools and churches, meeting points which strengthened and maintained community ties. None of these institutions were rebuilt where they existed or in a new location with the effective and unquestionable participation of the communities. Most of the original spaces did not survive, collapsed years after the crime, or are about to collapse. A single church, at the insistence of the affected community of Bento Rodrigues, began to be restored almost 9 years later. The dead mud also devastated on Brazil's best-known rivers, Rio Doce. This destruction made several traditional and subsistence activities completely unfishable. In addition to the cities, indigenous communities, quilombolas, riverside peoples, and so on were broken. This is considered by many experts the largest disaster in terms of socio-environmental devastation caused by iron ore tailings dam in the world. The catastrophe was not, however, sufficient for a structural review of the process of mineral exploration, governance, risk management, inspection, and especially towards and ethics aimed at all life, human, plant, and animal. Just 4 years later, on February 5th, 2019, another dam from the same mining company, Vale, collapsed less than 55 miles in a straight line from Mariana, in the city of Brumadinho. This time at lunch break. The dam stayed on top of a restaurant that the company itself built very close to the dam. When the rupture took place, the restaurant was crowded with mining workers. Therefore, I usually say that is in silence, invisibility, and total impunity that dams break, at least until now in Minas Gerais, the Brazilian state whose name is directly linked to mining. Brazil, in fact, comes from the name of a wood that was extracted and exploited a lot in my country during the Portuguese invasion and genocide. Pau-Brasil, one of our first commodities. The curious thing is that shortly after Brumadinho, in February 2019, another dam was announced as being in imminent risk of failure, for the first time in the context of devastation. Until then, we did not experience in Minas Gerais that frequency of forced displacement of entire communities within a territory due to the risk of dam failure. If dams are so fragile, they are either should not exist or could not be erected irresponsibly close to clusters of life. If the technique is so ineffective, it should not subject these populations to acute risks of death. These are not communities formed in risk areas, but instead mining enterprise that transform traditional and historical communities into vulnerable populations, forcibly displaced people, refugees from mining capitalism, vilified by the global markets for this type of exploration. For Judith Butler, the being of life is constituted with the operations of power, in which some are recognized as subjects and their existence as precarious. That is, which needs to be protected from violations. But in the mining enterprise, peripheral and riverside communities, indigenous people, and quilombolas do not have their lives recognized as life. When the dams break, technical oppression is immediately established as a global manual that teaches how to prevent and resistance and organized protests from the affected communities. In these memories of the past, the present, and especially the future, that mining companies tried to intervene. But these companies were not appointed to do so. They invade and intervene of the rights of others. With the finger of Walter Benjamin, mining corporations try to prevent a history built by those who are incessantly erased, exterminated, subordinated through control over survivals. In Mariana, while the survivors were staying in hotels and inns, a battalion of mining company employees tried to block their contact with the press, other members of the community, and activists. As a consequence of Mariana and Brumadinho, the corporations, in order to then to the necropolitics in which their dams are built, created the ZAS, self-rescue zones. If another collapse occurs when neither the public authorities and not even companies have the technical conditions to help people for the short time they have to flee. Given the proximity to the dams, they are then subject to their own fate. They should be called zones of death and not cynically of salvation. For Horácio Machado Araoz, modern colonial mining is one of the pillars of the Capitolocene and leads to a mineralization of what is human, that is a dehumanization defeat that places man and destructive axis of nature at the rights of those who are contained with it, among them the people in the path of the exploitative greed. This literary of horror can easily be seen in the poem Sentimento do Mundo by one of the most relevant Brazilian poets, Carlos Drummond de Andrade, himself affected by mining in Tabira, and who has long denounced the violence of devastation with industrial standards. When the bodies pass by, I will be alone, unrevealing the memory. On the bell ringer, the widow, and the microscopist, who inhabited the tent and were not found at dawn. That's it.
Hello? Yeah, good. Thank you, André. We'll listen to Mônica dos Santos. I'll translate for her. She's a local activist. I'll say again because we have a new person here in the audience. Thank you. She's a local activist from Bento Rodrigues in Mariana.
Eu me chamo Mônica, sou moradora de Bento Rodrigues, a primeira comunidade destruída pelo crime. Por que eu falo crime? Porque no dia 5 de novembro de 2015, a comunidade teve que correr, né? A gente teve que fugir do mar de lama, sem aviso de sirene, sem a gente ter tido um plano de evacuação. Então, a gente não teve alerta, né? Nós tivemos que nos ajudar para sobreviver daquele mar de lama.
My name is Mônica dos Santos. I'm a resident of Bento Rodrigues, the first community that was destroyed by the crime. I call it a crime because violations started when we had to run from a sea of mud with no warning, no siren alert, no alert or escape plan that could guarantee our lives. We had to help each other.
O mais triste é que 9 anos depois, ninguém foi responsabilizado, ninguém foi preso. E quando aconteceu o crime, nós, moradores, a gente gritou para o mundo que Bento não seria o primeiro e também não seria o último, né? Se não fosse feito algo para mudar a forma das empresas minerarem, outros crimes aconteceriam.
So what's very sad is that to this day, no one was being held responsible. No one paid bail or was arrested. And we said that something could happen again if nothing was being done to change the situation by then.
E nenhuma das pessoas hoje respondem por homicídio culposo e por também alguns crimes ambientais, porque prescreveram. Mesmo tendo denúncias, o Ministério Público ter feito vários relatórios, várias investigações, denúncias jornalísticas, mostrando que a barragem teve falha, né? Desde a sua construção, alguns moradores de Bento trabalhou na barragem, eles não eram engenheiro, não eram diretor, mas sentiam que algo estava errado, que algo pudesse acontecer.
Okay, so no one has been held for homicide crimes because all of the homicide crimes that were being considered and some of the environmental crimes have already prescribed, even if the prosecution service did present accusations and many press reports have done the same, showing that there were flaws in the dam construction. Many of our family members worked there. They weren't engineers or directors, but they could feel the risk.
A barragem, ela sempre foi um fantasma nas nossas vidas, né? Desde a infância até a vida adulta. Muitos de nossos familiares que trabalhavam lá, como eu disse, eles falavam que algo podia acontecer, mas ninguém levava a sério, né? Ninguém dava importância para aquilo, até que aconteceu o dia 5. E mesmo a gente, depois do dia 5, a gente gritando para o mundo, a gente tendo que atravessar, sair do nosso país, atravessar o mundo para fazer denúncia, tanto a empresa, diretores da BHP, quanto investidores, não nos deram ouvidos. E logo depois rompeu o Brumadinho, né? 3 anos depois rompeu o Brumadinho.
So, the dam has always been a ghost in our lives, from childhood to adulthood. As she had mentioned before, many of the family members worked there, but no one really thought that disaster, crime like this could happen. And then happened on the 5th of November. And even after that, when they have traveled the world, telling other people, other countries, making the accusations of what happened there, telling about the company BHP, an Anglo-Australian company, and the shareholders of these companies, nothing changed. And then it happened in Brumadinho again.
Lembrando que a Vale, ela tinha 50% da Samarco. Então, quando aconteceu em Brumadinho, ela não era mais reincidente, né? Já eram 2 crimes que a empresa carregava e até hoje ela não foi punida. E a desconsideração pela vida humana é tamanha que até hoje as empresas elas não reconhecem o nascituro pelo crime em Mariana e 2 por Brumadinho, mesmo tendo documentação que comprove que as mães estavam grávidas.
So Vale company, the Brazilian company, had 50% of Samarco that was the responsible for Mariana Dam. So when Brumadinho happened and Vale was the company there, it was the second crime of the company, and she was never punished for that. The disregard for human life is such that to this day, the company does not recognize the death of an unborn child in Mariana and 2 others in Brumadinho, even with sufficient medical evidence that there were women that were pregnant at that time and that lost the babies in the crime.
E agora, quando completam 9 anos, desde que nossas vidas ela foi devastada pelos rejeitos da mineração, há uma série de violências e nossos direitos continuam sendo violados diariamente.
As we complete 9 years since our lives were crossed by mining waste, there is a series of violence against our rights that daily continue to be perpetrated.
Nossos modos de vida, eles não serão restituídos. Por quê? Porque não há espaço no reassentamento para criar animais, para cuidar dos gados, para o nosso plantio de hortaliças, de árvores frutíferas, para criar, né, os animais, tanto a gente que é sobrevivente da lama, tivemos também animais que foram sobreviventes e as empresas não fizeram reassentamento, uma nova comunidade, se pensando nesses animais.
So our ways of life will not be restored. There is no space to raise in the resettlement. There is no space to raise our own animals, take care of our cattle, our chickens. There is no land for plant or vegetables, corn, fruit trees. Because as we survived the mud, some animals also survived the mud, but that they didn't think about that when building another compound for the people to live.
Nossa tradição de plantar, de cuidar, de colher, de trocar e de vender nossas plantas, ela está fadada a ser extinta. Porque um outro problema grave que temos no reassentamento é que não há previsão de água bruta. Então, a água que a gente vai ter que pagar. E a gente também não sabe qual vai ser o valor que a gente vai pagar, porque é tudo muito obscuro em relação ao tratamento das empresas, no que diz respeito ao reassentamento. A gente não é informado de valores, de quanto está sendo o gasto de cada casa. Então, a gente tem muito medo de, quando acabar um período, né, de adaptação, que é um período que as empresas vão estar custeando o pagamento de água, o pagamento de PTU, a gente tem medo de ter que sair do reassentamento por não ter condições de pagar pelos impostos, né? Ou seja, a gente vai ser extinto da nossa comunidade mais uma vez.
No, it's okay. Our tradition of planting, caring for, harvesting, exchanging, and selling is doomed to be extinguished. It's a serious problem for us. There is no raw water in the new community. Our water will be charged in a way that they don't know. They don't know exactly how much will cost, because there's no transparency on what's going on in the resettlement, because they don't have information of how much water costs or the taxes are, because for a short period of time the companies are paying for that, but they don't tell exactly how much that is. So they are afraid they will have to leave again their land in the future by not being able to pay for something they don't know how much costs.
Outro problema é que as pessoas da comunidade, após o rompimento, passaram a desenvolver vários problemas de saúde, desde a depressão, a ansiedade, o alcoolismo, as drogas. Já tivemos várias pessoas que suicidaram pós o rompimento. Ao todo, foram 64 pessoas da comunidade de Bento que faleceu após o rompimento, né? E uma outra doença que aumentou, posso dizer que 100%, que antes não tinham tanto, é o câncer. E quando a pessoa descobre, a duração é 6 meses. E isso antes não tinha.
So another big problem we have is related to health. Many cases of anxiety, depression, up to this alcohol abuse, suicide, many cases also. So 64 people from the community have already died since the dam collapsed, not in the day, but after that. And another thing that increased a lot were cancer cases. They are very frequent now, and when they discover in a very advanced stage, so people have only a few months to live after they discover it.
Quando a gente escolheu o terreno para ser reconstruído, nos foi prometido que não teria mineração perto, não teríamos mais barragem perto. E esse foi um dos motivos pelo qual não deixaram a gente reconstruir na origem, onde a gente morava, porque ainda tinha barragem. Mas é bom deixar claro que o Bento, ele não foi construído em área de risco. Bento é uma comunidade do século XVIII, e a Samarco, à época do rompimento, ia completar 40 anos. Então, o risco é que foi para cima da comunidade.
So they promised that the new community would be in a place where there were no dam. So this is why they didn't let the community to be rebuilt in the same place, because they argued there were risks involved. But it's important to stress that this community was not originally built in a risk area. It's a community from the 18th century, and San Marco had only 40 years when the dam collapsed.
E em todo esse processo da reparação, ele não tem uma participação efetiva das comunidades, né, dos atingidos, porque a Fundação Renova, que foi constituída para reparar os danos, né, reparar o crime, o que ela tem feito é renovar o crime a cada dia. Por quê? Porque são vários os direitos que são violados. Quando a gente acha que a gente está participando da elaboração do projeto da casa, por exemplo, onde a propaganda que ela faz e as empresas, né, é muito grande, que tem participação, a casa ela é desenhada do jeito que o atingido quer, com os materiais que o atingido quer, não é dessa forma. Tudo é muito imposto. Quando a gente vai elaborar o projeto, a gente fala o que a gente tinha, como era antes e como a gente quer. E acaba sendo feito o projeto do jeito que os arquitetos querem, não do jeito que a gente quer. E na escolha do material é a mesma coisa. Eles colocam 3 opções de piso. Então, não é do jeito que o atingido quer. É uma imposição de material que você tem 3 opções e é aquilo.
Okay, no, wait. She was telling about the reconstruction of the houses. There is no effective participation in the reparation process. Renova Foundation, which was constituted to do this reparation case, renovates the crime each day because there are many rights that are being vetoed every day. For example, the case of the house. They don't have the liberty to choose the house like they had it before. So they give only a few options of materials. For example, for the floor, they give you 3 options and that's decided technically for them. So it's imposed on grounds of technical justification.
E a justiça brasileira, ela até nos recebe, mas ela não nos escuta e não respeita os nossos pleitos. Assim também é o governo. Infelizmente, eles têm ultrapassado um pouco tudo que diz respeito aos atingidos. Um fato simples foi a construção do DIC S4 em 2016, através de um decreto N número 500, que o governador de Minas liberou sem a nossa, digamos, autorização. E isso hoje, 8 moradores, 8 propriedades, as pessoas estão sendo réu no processo por não ter aceitado os valores e o tempo que esse DIC ia permanecer encobrindo as nossas terras.
So, Brazilian justice does receive us, but does not listen to us. And the same could be said about government. There is a case of dam S4 that was authorized by government officials in 2016, but as I understood, maybe Anna could tell me, 8 landowners are being sued by San Marco because they didn't accept that the land they had previously would be filled with water because of the dam.
A DIC has been built to recollect the mud from the area that was affected, and this DIC was passing through land of some of the people that were affected. The government offered some compensation, which were not sufficient as per the people found, and 8 of them refused to accept the compensation and refused to allow the DIC to pass. So they are being prosecuted by the state of Minas Gerais.
Good, thank you.
E as lideranças da comunidade, as pessoas, assim como eu, né, que fazem parte da comissão de atingidos, essa comissão ela foi formada em dezembro de 2015, logo após o crime, né? E a gente vem sofrendo retaliação. A casa da minha mãe, por exemplo, ela só começou a ser construída há um mês. Isso, assim, o que já foi feito até hoje é apenas a fundação. Então, a gente ainda tem que viver com essa angústia, pensando se a gente vai conseguir alcançar entrar na casa. Porque, como eu disse, 64 pessoas não tiveram essa oportunidade de entrar na casa e de receber uma indenização.
So, since December 2015, Monica and other community leaders are part of a committee that has been discussing the reparation, and they are victims of retaliation. So she says that in her mother's home is only just beginning to be built, and it's still in the foundations of the house, and they are afraid that maybe they are not going to be able to enter their new home, as happened to 64 people that have already died.
Quando eu falo de Bento, em relação, ao dique que alagou uma parte da comunidade, ainda tem o rejeito, ainda tem o mato que a Samarco plantou. Logo no início ela jogou um coquetel de sementes de leguminosas. Então o que a gente consegue ver hoje é a cena do crime encoberta de mato, mas mato que foi plantado, não mato que simplesmente a natureza nasceu. E falar do Bento, do cuidado com a terra, que para a gente, mesmo destruído, continua sendo um território sagrado, a gente só conseguiu voltar a pisar e a fazer as nossas festas tradicionais, a celebrar o nosso padroeiro, depois de muita luta, depois de muita resistência. Porque as empresas nos impediam de várias formas, desde mandar policiamento para nos impedir, até hoje você vai no Bento, você tem segurança em 2 portarias. Então, foi através de muita luta que a gente conseguiu e que a gente consegue voltar no território, que para alguns tem uma resistência em voltar por tudo que passou, mas para outros, voltar para o território, voltar em Bento, é um remédio, é uma terapia.
She was talking about how Bento is today. So you have mud from the dam collapse. You have vegetation that was planted by Renova, not that were original from the land. And she was telling about the care for the land and how it's sacred for them, for the community, even if destroyed. And it was a fight to be able to be back in the land to celebrate sacred ceremonies and other ceremonies, because there was police that banned them from going there, and until today there are security guards around the place. So it's a fight to be back there, resistance, and for some it's like a medicine to be there.
E o mais triste é saber que a Samarco, que cometeu o crime, está com um projeto a longo prazo que prevê o aumento, na produção, e eles vão usar agora pilha de estéreo, mas eles usam a palavra estéreo para não falar o rejeito, para ficar menos pesado, para suavizar. E uma dessas pilhas, ela vai ficar a 500 metros da comunidade atingida. Então, hoje no Bento a gente tem a Igreja das Mercês, que é uma igreja sobrevivente, uma igreja do século XVIII também. E a gente está no processo de reconstruir a Igreja de São Bento, que para a gente é muito importante. Então, esse medo da mineração, ele ainda continua com esse projeto. E esse projeto, ele vindo a ser implementado, ele vai atingir também a comunidade de Camargos, que uma dessas pilhas vai ficar a 200 metros de um morador, e o próprio reassentamento. A gente vai ter que conviver com poeira e várias outras coisas.
Thank you. O que é pilha estéreo?
Pilha de rejeito.
So the most sadly is to see that Samarco, which committed the crime, has a project to increase production, and she was talking about this pile of mud from the dam, and this material is only 500 meters from the community that was impacted by the dam collapse. So she was also telling about a church in Bento, Merced Church. They are fighting for reconstruction the church, and they are very afraid of mining because of the continuing of this project that could also impact other communities.
Bento resiste.
Bento resists. Thank you, Monica, very much for you being here and sharing your story. It was great. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass to Companho. Can we have, please, the first presentation?
Thank you, Joanna. Well, thanks for having me here. What I'm going to talk about is the work that the so-called Extraordinary Independent Consulting Committee of Investigation, also called CIA, EI, carried out. So what was exactly the objective of the work we carried out? I'll tell you what was my participation on that. It was independently, this is the most important word on this process, was independently investigate the causes and contexts and to the extent possible the responsibilities of the failure. So the composition of this committee were three persons. Ellen Gracie. Ellen Gracie was a former minister of the Supreme Court in Brazil. Myself, that has a background of forensic investigations, and also Manuel Martins, which is an engineer specialized in dams, in construction, maintenance of dams. To me, it was something very different, because I was during my career, I participated of more than 100 investigations, but for the first time, I participated on an investigation that the consequence of the fact, of the incident, whatever you call it, that you were working on or investigating, were the death of 270 or 272 people. One thing that it is also important to inform is that differently from Mariana, Brumadinho, Mariana the dam was owned by Samarco. Samarco was, as Monica mentioned, was a joint venture between BHP and Vale. Brumadinho, no, Brumadinho was this dam was 100% owned by Vale itself. So what was some characteristics of this committee were, of course, what was the one important detail? We were not the professionals that were invited to take part of this committee was not contacted, either identified by Vale, were identified by a headhunting firm, which is Korn & Ferry, which most people know. Well, I was contacted by Korn & Ferry. I'm sorry. Next. Okay. So what was the main concern that we have right after we were hired? It was to work on a very rigid mandate with the objective of ensuring our independence to make the work we understand was necessary to work on an independent way. So we were very rigid on develop formal mandate, formal work plan, and everything that would make sure we would work on an independent way. So one question that may arise is, do you understand that you had the independence to do exactly what you wanted was necessary to do? And I would say yes. We have no limitation. Everything that we understand was necessary to do was done. Every document, every person that we wanted to have contact with, we had, with the exception of people that wanted to participate, to be interviewed. So I think it was, at the end of the day, was a very independent work. The committee itself, also to to ensure independence, formalization, and also responsibility of the committee was created by extraordinary board of directors, which means that the regulators, the market regulators, which our SEC or the CVM, was also be acknowledged about the existence of this committee and also be liable, responsible for the work that we were going to do. So we had to set up a team, an investigation team, 3 people. It was absolutely impossible to execute the kind of work we planned to do. So we ended up engaging against. We selected the firm, we identified the firm, we negotiated fees and so forth. Another thing that it was very important to ensure independence was that we had a budget to carry out the work. So one way to limit the ability to do the work would be limiting the budget. We had a budget that we have recommended. So we selected an investigation team, which was comprised of one law firm that is specialized in forensic investigation, a forensic firm, and also a U.S. law firm, because Vale is a U.S. is a public company in the U.S. And also 2 technical firms, 2 geotechnical firms that were responsible for the technical work. So what was the work that we planned? We tried to break up the work into 2 phases, not phases, but 2 different type of works. One was the non-technical aspect. Someone can say, well, but this is not important. No, in my opinion, the non-technical aspect was the most important work, because I'll tell you why. Technical aspects was not black and white, but it was more factual. So we had images, we had all the geotechnical information. So the technical calls was pretty straightforward. Non-technical aspects. So I developed the non-technical work, and I tried to develop a plan of work that could be as broad as possible, and not only focusing on the incident itself, but also on the culture, controls, risk management. So we tried to. My idea when developing the work plan was to look at all of the areas of the company, looking at the company as a whole, from the risk management at the site to the board of directors procedures and involvement directly or indirectly with the incident. So I understand. I think I don't have the exact number, but I think there were approximately 150 people working on the broad investigation. So, in order for the 3 members of the committee to ensure quality, to be aware of what was going on, we were carrying out weekly meetings, either online or presential meetings. Presential meetings were held every 15 days. And meeting and interviews with the investigation, with the management investigation team, and also authorities. Why management investigation team? Because management decided to do its own investigation. So we did our independent investigation, and management did its own investigation. Also for legal reasons, they had to do that. A reporting line. This is also important. So we were reporting to the chair of the board of directors of Vale, which, by the way, had a pretty interesting involvement in our job. And we also did benchmarking analysis. We tried to identify incidents that were similar to this one, and try to compare what happened, how it was reported, what were the causes, to try to develop parallels and issues that were common between the incident. The main incident that we were able to compare was the BP incident that took place. I think it was kind of 10 years before this one. And also one thing that it's not my presentation, but I just recollected, is that we also, one of the things that we also tried to do was we kind of cut it off. We developed a timeline. So our investigation procedure started in 2015. Why 2015? Because it was when Mariana failure happened. So we were trying to identify there if significant control procedures, risk management procedures were implemented after Mariana. So main findings. It's very hard to identify a couple of findings that were the main ones that we identified, but I tried to identify the most significant ones. So technical findings. I don't think it's worthwhile to discuss technical findings just because it's too technical, but mostly the cause identified was instability and liquefaction. Liquefaction is mostly when something that is solid is transformed into liquid. And several technical triggers that I don't think it's also worthwhile to discuss here. So non-technical are findings that are not directly associated to the incident, that can have direct or indirect connection with the causes. So maybe the most important is that we identified vast evidence that since 2003 the instability of the dam was known by the company. We also identified several technical discussion, and also between the company and the company auditors. Just a quick note. The whole fiscalization of the technical and risk conditions were made by private companies, and then the government agencies had the responsibility to monitor that, which was not done at all. So during this period from 2003 up to the incident, there were several auditors. One thing that we identified that was a trend is that always management was discussing the results of the work and sometimes interfering with the results with the conclusion of the audits. And sometimes we identified changes, for better, of course, from draft that was issued by the auditors to the final form that was issued. So those, I understand, are really the most important issues. There are several others that are also relevant, but we don't have the time to discuss here. There's something that is also very important. It's conflict of interest. The auditing companies, because it was not only ONA, as I mentioned, they had a small the audit of the dam conditions itself were a very small portion of their revenues they generated with Vale. And so just as an example, the audit work was something like 100,000 reais, just to give a reference. But they had some other technical services that represented 15 times or 150 times the fees. So this generate no independence at all. This is all documented in the report. So our deliverable, the deliverables so also the other very important section of the report was recommendations. We did 25. We issued at the report. We issued 25 recommendations, technical and non-technical. That again comes from very basic risk management recommendations at the plant up until governance procedures at a board level. The recommendations, 100% of the recommendations that we proposed were implemented. Vale issued a public note, what we call, I just forgot the name, but they made public to the market and to the society as a whole the recommendations that we did versus the actions that they have implemented. So the deliverables, we issued 2 reports. The idea was to provide transparency to the society. So we did a short report, which we called executive summary or summarized report, that was approximately 50 pages long, that was made available at the website company, so anyone could have access to, and a detailed report that was approximately 1,000 page long, that were made available to the authorities, including legal authorities, and also anyone that wanted to have access to could request, and they would provide. The report was issued on February 2020. Two final notes. One is, my understanding is that the repercussion of the report should have been much larger, but much bigger, and should have made much more public. But a fact of life that happened was when we issued the report, everyone remembers, we issued the report on February 2020, which was a couple of days when the pandemic was considered a pandemic. So the press and the society as a whole was not, to be very, very, very honest, was not interested on an incident where 2,072 people died. There were, thousands of people died. I always said there was a Brumadinho every day. So it lost a little bit of public attention. And this is one of the things. And as a conclusion, I would say that this is what happened. And of course, there were responsibilities. The responsibilities are spread over the long report, but this is not something that happens just for one fact. This happened for a combination of factors. But one thing that is very important to mention is that several measures that should have been taken, and one of them is what Andrea just mentioned. That was maybe the closing of the canteen, the restaurant. There were enough information to take that decision, but the company and the management was doing back and forth and avoiding such decisions. And if that had been made, several lives would be saved. And also, one thing that it's also important to mention is that the company promoted several changes, but again, very, very broad changes. Most directors of the company was replaced, and I think was a consequence of a serious work that had been made. Legal consequences were not something that we had to monitor. Our work, it was made very clear. Your work is looking at the past and understand causes and context and when possible responsibilities, and this is what we did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Companhia, for this view over what happened inside the company. And so I'll pass to Charlotte.
Hello. Yes, so as we see in this type of cases, the role of victims and their compensation remains limited. However, as the case of the dam collapses in Brazil clearly shows, lack of transparency can cause social, environmental, and of course, democratic damages. This is why we need to enhance the compensation of victims in this type of cases. So I wanted to address a few different thoughts. In TI France, we focus a lot on victims of probity offense, so I wanted to explain a little bit the difficulty that we face with compensation of probity offense, and then talk a little bit about negotiated justice as a way to improve compensation for corruption offenses, but also environmental disasters. We recently conducted a study that shows that there are very, very important progress to be made, but it is also an interesting tool, so I would like to bring it in the discussion and raise some thoughts and guidelines on how can we better compensate victims. And finally, I will just focus on preventive measures. In France, we have what we call the duty vigilance law, which is a law that I will come back on it later. So, yeah, I think that what we notice first as a difficulty to compensate a victim of probity offense is that the victims are rarely defined in legislation or in international convention. Who are the victims? Business shareholders, the state, the society as a whole. So, while looking at it, what we see is that often very little compensation is awarded to victims in civil society. And we'll see that this type of cases have various incidences. So another difficulty is how do we identify the victims? And another question as well would be by which means do we identify them and integrate them into the proceedings? In most countries, we see that compensation is awarded to victims who can also demonstrate that they have suffered harm directly linked to the offense. This means that there is a selection between victims, and consequently, some groups of persons may not be considered victims, and their legal standing may be denied when they do not have a direct and specific interest, even though they obviously suffered from the offense. So if and when legal proceedings arise, additional research is necessary to further set out the causality and quantify the harm. And in a case that we are working on in TI France, involving the corruption of a foreign public official by a French multinational, we are trying to establish the impact of corruption on power cuts and the birth that occurred consequently in hospitals. And we realized that producing a report that attests to the direct link between these different phenomena and that can be taken to a court as a proof is an extremely difficult task. And the same question have arisen in France, for example, with the reparation of ecological damage. In French, the reparation of ecological damage is enshrined in the law. But a distinction is made between the reparation of the pure ecological damage, meaning that caused to the environment, and the reparation of damage caused to victims, which was rather considered through civil action without a guarantee on the extent of the rights that can be granted to the victims. And of course, another difficulty is that sometimes compensation arrives years later, sometimes too late, as criminal or civil proceedings are by their very nature lengthy. And this is why damages are more and more repaired through negotiated justice and deferred prosecution acts, DPAs, with multinationals. And it is a particularly powerful tool for obtaining multinational accountability because they will pay substantial fines and avoid the criminal trial route, which with offenses that are often very difficult to prove and lengthy procedural DAs. But what we've noticed is that DPAs implemented today are still struggling with one of their main objectives, which is compensating the victims of corruption or environmental disasters in the settlements. So in TI France, I don't know if it's not my. Oh, sorry. I don't. No, it's not mine. My present. Yeah, I wanted to show infographics because I'm going to talk about the study. Oh, okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, that's it. So in TI France, we recently carried out a study on the role of victims in DPAs. So in France, it's called CEGIP, Convention Judiciaire d'Intérêt Public, that can compensate victims for tax, probity, or environmental offenses. And as compensation of victims' losses are essential aspect of the balance and acceptability of the mechanism, we see that there is still progress to be made. So to give you some key figures, 24 out of 54 DPAs in France have ultimately compensated victims, half of which were in environmental matters. And only 61.7% of identified victims have been compensated. So it's not enough, as we can see. Another key point is that we see that the identification of victims is mainly done at their own initiative. So you can see it on the number in yellow for the victim who joined as civil parties. And of course, what also we've noticed is that the majority of compensation refusal occurred because no compensable damage was claimed within the very tight deadline. And yeah. We also found that the majority of compensated victims in matter of integrity breaches are businesses, with an NGO rather playing a role in triggering the prosecution. For environmental matters, NGOs are pretty quite well compensated, however. So this is why we think that some guidelines must be shared, and we've shared a lot in our study, and I have a few studies in here in French or English, so I can share them with you later. First, it is important to adopt a broad and inclusive approach of victims of these offenses, recognizing that individuals, entities, and states can be considered as a victim. And this should also, of course, include overseas victims. Also, compensation should not be based on a narrow interpretation of the damage, but on a full analysis of the broader harm caused by the offense. It is important to explicitly recognize environmental, social, but also cultural harm in the definition and the comprehension of the victim, to take into account the magnitude of the harm caused to the victims. And it should include individuals, but also community-wide victims. Also, another guideline is that the consideration of the victim should start at the investigation stage and ensure their participation in subsequent proceedings, sentencing, and settlements. And of course, to rely a little bit on TI France experience, I think that CSO can play an important role in ensuring that victims are represented in proceeding and should be able to report crimes, give evidence, represent victims, or bring public interest litigation. We see today that a lot of, in many countries, a lot of CSOs do not have legal standing. In France, we have legal standing. TI France has legal standing. And it is an extremely powerful tool in order to launch investigation and to help identify the victims, claim redress for the victims, and also obtain the restitution of the illicit fund to the spoliated population. So to rely on TI France, for instance, we can file complaints on national corruption, ill-gotten gains cases, foreign bribery, and foreign CSOs can also bring their cases abroad in front of French justice if they can establish a link, of course, with France. But we do not have yet an emblematic case of corruption linked to an environmental damage. And just to finish on DPA, I think what is also important is that to have a broad publicity and awareness raising amongst civil society on these tools. And also when compensation are awarded, it should be useful to have a better publicity regarding the amount requested by the victims, the number of victims who have come forward, and the method used to assess their losses. I just wanted to now talk just a little bit about preventive measures. Preventing this type of offenses, property offenses and environmental disasters, must obviously involve implementing preventive measures within companies. This means putting in place risk evaluation, control, and warning mechanism with very clear transparency guidelines. In France, we have what we call a duty of vigilance law, which obliges major French companies to draw up, publish and implement appropriate measures to identify risk and prevent violations of human rights and environmental disaster. So companies have to publish a vigilance plan to establish their risk assessment. And we also have a distinct law that imposes a whole series of obligations on French companies in terms of compliance and preventing property offenses. And what we've noticed is that too often the link between property offenses and human rights is not taken into account at all by the company within their risk management. It seems that the two aspects, infringement of human rights and risk of corruption, for instance, are really dealt within silos. And yet, as we see, the implications are huge. So, in TI France, we are also currently undertaking a study on the impact of corruption on human rights abuse with Transparency International and the FIDH. And we are going to focus on analyzing the due diligence plans implemented by the French companies to see whether they take into account the risk of corruption in their analysis of the risk of environmental or social damage. And this will enable us to draw a number of recommendations in order to strengthen compliance program within French firms and hopefully prevent many more damages. Okay, finish. And just to finish, I wanted to talk about litigation that are arising in France for breaches of vigilance law by multinationals. And for example, I think that you heard of it, but several foreign and French NGOs have recently assigned the firm Casino. They accuse Casino of failing to take the necessary measures to exclude from its supply chain in Brazil and Colombia beef linked to illegal deforestation, land grabbing, and violation of indigenous people rights. So we see that indigenous people are demanding reparation for the environmental damage and human rights violation caused by the illegal deforestation. So the case is still ongoing, but but I think that it has opened a new avenue also to fight this kind of misbehavior and obtain remedies.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I'll pass directly to Ana Carolina Salomão. Thank you. I'm controlling the time. Can we have, please, the last presentation?
Checking, yes, it's online. Well, the interesting thing of being the last one is that I have the opportunity to build from what everyone already said, and I will try to seal everything together and see if I can not only make a presentation but also help the audience to pack it all together. I also ask excuse because I will use some photos here to illustrate some environmental disasters, environmental crimes committed by some corporations, and that can be some strong pictures. But the idea is to show, to represent the topic of this conversation, which is destroyed lives. I will talk about that. And I will start talking about the Mariana case. So Professor André started by giving us a description of what's happened in the day. And if you are here still listening to us, that means that you are interested. So I invite you to open your favorite podcast player platform and search for Dead River. It's a podcast where Monica and others tell the story of what happened in 8 episodes. It is in English, though. Well, Professor André told us a bit of the facts, and Monica came with the story for those that felt this, that were living in the community when the dam collapsed. The idea of this picture is to represent that the impact of a dam collapsing goes way beyond of the mud. It destroyed the entire ecosystem and all the infrastructure around where those people were living. As Monica said, they still are not living in a place with adequate conditions, as you can see from the pictures. They don't have full service. They don't have access to water. They don't have their house anymore to live. This is the idea to show the indirect impacts. And this is a picture from the community of Bento Rodrigues. That the idea is to illustrate what Monica was telling you. And with this very strong picture on my backdrop, I want to speak with you about the Reparation Fund, actually the Reparation Foundation that was built, Renova. André already told about it, and Monica a little as well, to tell you why it is not sufficient or why it hasn't been effective in repairing the damages caused by the mining dam. Well, the dam in Mariana was operated by a company called Samarco. Samarco was controlled by Vale, a Brazilian mining company, and BHP Billiton, an Anglo-Australian mining company, each of which had 50% of controlling. When the dam collapsed, you can imagine that there was a huge commotion. We are talking about a devastating accident. To give you an idea, it is as if mud has traveled from Luxembourg to Paris, or the entire length of Portugal, or from Scotland to Thames. The area is enormous. We represent in Pogo's Good Heads 600,000 individuals affected by this disaster, just like Monica. Well, you can imagine that after it happened, there was a commotion, and the Brazilian public prosecutors and independent lawyers, they all tried to gather around to trying to find a way to defend the victims of those disasters. However, unfortunately, in Brazil, we lack a institutional infrastructure for collective redress. So they had to wait for the public prosecutors to put forward their investigations. As a result of an adjustment, a negotiation between the public ministers, public prosecutors, and Samarco, the companies accepted to create a foundation called Renova to compensate the victims. This foundation, Renova, was and still is controlled by Samarco, BHP, and Vale. And no huge decision or important decision in Renova can be taken without the consent of all the three, Samarco, Vale, and BHP. I will not give the answer, I will just put the question. Considering what we learned today, that independency, governance, and transparency are important for proper and fair compensation, do you think that Renova is capable or has the structure to provide adequate compensation for the victims of the disaster that their controlling entities caused? Monica gave us some reports here in respect of what has been done by Renova. She mentioned publicity and propaganda. So it's important to raise the problem is when the compensation funds is structured in a way that the companies that cause the damage have the control of the funds and the control of how to spend it, there are huge incentives for the companies to spend money, not with proper compensation, but actually with actions that will protect their brand equity from erosion, that will prevent actually further compensation, that will impact the ability of the victims to organize themselves and to resist what is being imposed, and also to block new activities. And I will give examples of this. So for those that don't know, what we do at Pogo's Good Head, we gather a large group of people, unfortunately people affected by environmental crimes, just like in Mariana, for example. And after hearing them and understanding their cause, we go to litigate against the company that caused it, even if it is overseas. So in the case of Mariana, we went to knock on the doors of BHP in England, and there is a case running there since the past 6 years. We are going to trial of this case now in October, a long trial, long hearing, starting in October and ending in February. Well, you can imagine, or maybe, I don't know if you can imagine, but we are under great pressure in Brazil, our clients are, because the companies that cause the damage, the companies that control the funds that should be used for reparation, are using their power to prevent this trial to occur. Just last week, the Brazilian Institute of Mining Companies, IBRA, has filed a constitutional motion to prevent our clients from claiming overseas, abroad, in the courts of England, that Renova was insufficient, that BHP and Vale were responsible for the crime. They are not only, there's not only a problem in respect of lack of transparency and lack of independency, but there is also a discrepancy in respect of who controls the more funds. So we are talking here about Monica and their neighbors, their communities, gathered together to have to fight against the most powerful and more rich companies of the world. It is a very unfair battle, I would say. But unfortunately, Mariana is not the only case of such that we have in Brazil, as you already learned today. Brumadinho is another case that talks a lot about transparency and corruption. In this case, private corruption, as we already learned as well. Pogo's Good Head also defends the victims of this environmental crime in the courts of in the courts of Germany, in Munich. And in this case, we do not go against Vale. We already learned what Vale did after the disaster. We are going against the company the auditors that were mentioned by Companho. I'm talking about corruption because what we could learn from the investigators from the federal police and also from the independent committee that Companho was mentioning, that the auditors actually had a strong incentive to mask the risks that they found because they didn't want to lose Vale as a client. So that's in the heart of the problem. And another case that I would like to bring attention to you, it's not a dam that collapsed, but it's a consequence of the exploitation of salt mine in the city of Maceió in the northeast of Brazil. This case is interesting because what you usually listen or read in the Brazilian press is that it is the next example of fair compensation, where a foundation is now being formed and where private company, in this case Braskem, has paired with the public prosecutors and with civil society to provide fair compensation to the people that got affected. Before showing you the next picture, I would try to narrate what's happening in this neighborhood. Happening because it's not in the past, it's an ongoing problem. Because of the exploitation of salt mine, there were tremors, the earth started to tremble, and artificial earthquakes were produced because of this exploitation. People had to leave their houses and move from that neighborhood. What is being said is that the people that used to live in this region, and it's much, much bigger than that, it's just a laser focus photo, were compensated by having to leave their houses. However, what would you think if I tell you that actually this compensation was an act of sale and acquisition of the property? So the company actually bought the property, paying the value of a damaged property for these people that can no longer live there. Braskem is silently becoming the owner of Maceió by not actually compensating people, but expropriating them from where they used to live. And last case that I would like to bring attention to, and to say that unfortunately those things do not happen only in Brazil. This case is the oil spill in Ventanilla in Peru, caused by Repsol. In 2022, a large oil spill happened in the shores of Peru, caused by the oil perfunction conducted by Repsol in that area. Is a Spanish company that is based, actually they are controlling entities based in the Netherlands. And in this case, Pogos Goodhead represents over 50,000 fishermen living in the shores of Ventanilla and other small regions in Peru against the oil company. As I said, it's a Spanish company, but their controlling entity and their assets are in the Netherlands. So we decide to, again, knock on their door where their assets are. And we filed on behalf of those fishermen a claim in the Netherlands. Just the last minute to say that what is important that I would like to bring everything together is that criminal events, just like Mariana, Brumadinho, Braskem, Repsol oil spill, unfortunately happened by corporate misconduct, affecting life of many innocent people that had nothing to do with that, and is caused by lack of transparency, lack of governance, and lack of clear measures in respect of how to prevent all of that. Unfortunately, it's not always that the companies step forward and take responsibility for what they caused and start an investigation. And why it doesn't happen? Again, lack of transparency and poor governance, but also capture of the civil society, capture of the public officials, capture of the judiciary for the capital. And considering all of this, and now trying to tie with what we learned from Charlotte, unfortunately, the mechanisms to compensate the victims are insufficient, even in those jurisdictions just like France that are fighting to pass more progressive laws on this. There is still insufficient to see. So we need all of you combined to help us to raise awareness. So please share this video with those that you think that would care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. We don't have much time. I would say I have one question, but maybe we won't have time to answer it. But just put the question out there. It's something that we have discussed in the previous week together. How, and what you just said, Transparency International, for example, a civil society organization, and we could get together and think about potential guidelines, I don't know, through international mechanisms of some kind of instrument that could help in future cases, because we know they will happen, to direct the companies to repair in some way. I don't know if somebody wants to say something about that, but we have this idea to begin a project maybe or something like that.
If I will actually make reference to the duty of vigilance and supply chain accountability rules that are being enacted in France and in other jurisdictions as well. We are seeing this passing in Germany, in Japan, in Spain, in the US, in UK up to the certain level, and it will spill over, I would say, as a positive externality, I hope, through other countries. And we are seeing also a trend of transnational litigation to tackle global problems. We will have to think about global mechanisms to seek justice. There are challenges for this, and I think that this would be an interesting thing for us to explore together here on this panel, especially if we consider the emergency of the climate crisis and the fact that the multinationals, they have their tentacles everywhere. So mining companies in Brazil or exploitation in West Africa, in Southeast Asia, but their headquarters are nowhere. Because even when you go to their clear headquarters that they picked to be in Ireland or in the Netherlands or in Luxembourg for tax reasons, when you go there, they try to claim that, oh, no, my jurisdiction is not here, it's in Papua Nova Guinea. And then when you go there, oh, no, it's just a subsidiary, the headquarters is in New York. So they are nowhere to be seen. And I think that we have to start thinking law together with civil society, with the academia, and with the NGOs to think how can we develop and evolve the system to protect Monica and others.
Good, thank you. Somebody else want to say something? No, we're done, we're good. Thank you very much for being here for the past hour and a half with us and in IACC series in Lithuania. And well, let's see if we can bring these ideas to create something from these ideas. Thank you very much.